Well, hello everyone. Thank you so very, very much for coming tonight and opening yourself up to hearing something. So hopefully there's something worth hearing here. I certainly believe there is. So like Daryl said, I'm Ben Kieruff, and I grew up here in San Diego. And I like hiking and burritos and my fiance. And I am a special ed teacher. So that's my summary. And today I'm going to talk about the flow of lessons and experiences I've had in my life. But first, a little bit of background about me. So I grew up very loved. And I think love is the foundation for everything else that matters in life. My foundation of being loved came from my mother, Carol. Her love was just the very clearest thing I knew. It was present and trustworthy 100%. And that love from her was a gateway to allowing myself to be loved by God. So one way I felt loved by my mom was all the attention that she gave me. I always felt safe and cherished and very listened to. I knew my thoughts and feelings mattered. I did not have to fight for her attention, but attention was given. How are you? Or tell me about your day, or I notice you're getting better at skateboarding. And I experienced her love as an allowing love. When I was a kid and wanted to stop and look at the cool bugs crawling around on the ground, she stopped and let me look. Look how they move. I was fascinated. So she allowed me a sense of discovery and a chance to be able to direct my own energy and interests. So I also grew up very curious and interested in lots of things. I still am. The way I first remember about how things worked was when something broke. So this was actually a thrilling moment, which meant that I could try and take something apart and get it working again. So a broken radio, awesome. I'm going to get it working, or maybe tear it down into 100 different non-working pieces, which might be just as good or perhaps even better. And aligned with taking things apart was building things up. And Legos were my absolute favorite toys. My fiance will tell you that they still are my favorite toys. And the brilliant thing about Legos is that you can build the model on the box and then take them apart and build something of your own. And that power to take the pieces and build something new is always there. So this curiosity and interest was and is a big part of me. And I'd take things apart, see how they work, build it up, and then build something new. Whether it's a radio, Legos, or the first stirrings of discovering some pieces that would eventually build into a relationship with God. So it was really different for me to feel a pull towards God because I didn't grow up in the faith or really going to church at all. I only went on Easter and Christmas when my grandparents were in town. But I remember being curious about something more, about something that seemed to move a lot of people. This God sounds interesting, but how does God work? But I just couldn't get any information on how God worked. None of my friends in high school could really answer that question. I got answers like, well, this is what they teach me, or this is what my parents think. But no one could speak of a living God that they themselves knew or experienced. It's like to them, God was just something that was. And I believe if you love something, you want to know it intimately. It would be like if I asked Pastor Daryl about his truck that he loves. And all he could say about it was like, well, it has 4 tires and it's a truck. And the rest he was uncurious and ignorant about. Just like that, people I talked to couldn't describe how God worked or what mattered in the relationship. It just was. So faith was something I couldn't understand at that time. I couldn't understand how God worked or grasp the parts and the pieces and how they related to me. So getting to know God or deepening any possible faith did not have any interest to me at the time. So my earliest longing for God, for something more of God, was not satisfying. Then next I got to find my voice and more knowledge. And I found this in going off to college, which was the perfect experience for me as a curious person. And I finally met people who could talk about God and how God worked. It's like someone popped open the hood of a truck and started telling me how the engine uses gas to make the tires spin, and it's all directed by the turning of the wheel. These were pieces that I could grasp and build with. I looked under the hood and I was astounded. God is understandable? This was a revelation. Someone can tell me how God works. Yes, this is what I had been looking for. So my faith started to grow, and as I read and I prayed and I started to experience the living God in my own life. So with this knowledge, I was empowered to have a relationship with God that I could start to know and understand. I finally had the building blocks of a growing faith in the more. So now I'm going to use the more in a way that theologian Marcus Borg uses it. It's the primary feeling, belief, or pull towards something that is greater and bigger than we experience in our daily lives. Many of us in the church have come to know God as the more that first pulled on our hearts. And so at the same time I'm finding God in college, I'm also starting to find my own voice. Some people know themselves and they have their own voice or in itself an identity from very early on, and some people take a long, long time, if ever, to develop and find their own voice. Most people, like myself, fall somewhere in between. So now I'm going to talk about my first identity and building and rebuilding of that. Now, with identity, who we are is molded through interactions between who we actually are, which is our true selves, and how other people treat us. So who is the Ben that other people are reflecting back to me and reinforcing? So my earliest identity, if you asked other people, was, who is Ben? Well, Ben's smart. He's a smart kid. So I knew that role. I knew about being the smart kid, and I put on that identity and clothed myself with it. I had lots of things to say and lots of thoughts, but then there were huge gaps in my life for a so-called smart kid. I was not aware of my own feelings or how to express them. I didn't know how to ask questions that revealed my ignorance. And I didn't know how to ask for help when something was beyond my abilities, and I couldn't do it on my own. And so these were all things that went against the notion of Ben is smart and he can do it. So this identity of being the smart kid both helped me understand and delineate who I was, and it also confined and shackled me from growing beyond it. And I wanted and I needed to grow beyond the starter notion, this first notion of myself. So I set my goal to be able to know and express what I was feeling, which is kind of hard for a guy, right? To find a way to not do things on my own and to reach out and do things with others and to ask for help. So in fits and starts, I reached those goals and grew beyond my old identity that held me back. My identity as a self-sufficient, smart, and capable person ironically left me dumb and alone. But college, with all its successes and failures, joy and heartbreak, growth and challenges, helped me to sometimes painfully break out of the small notion of self that I had been working with. And I left college larger and freer, and I knew more of who I was. So then getting out of college began a kind of phase in my life where I could identify a bit myself more, and it shifted from discovery to living that discovered life. So I call this section Writing the Missing Manual, okay? So the challenge is that we as a people, we don't come with a manual. Like, I didn't come with a manual, did you? Your TV comes with a manual, and your car does too. And the manual has sections like maintenance and troubleshooting. But the manual for us is left for you to write and to figure out on your own. And plenty of people offer advice and guidelines, but it's up to you to see what fits and what works for you. So I discovered that to keep my life in balance and my head above water, I had to pay attention to 5 categories, which I call the 5 pillars. So when I discovered if my life was out of balance, I was neglecting or deficient in one of these areas. So my 5 pillars, the first one is curiosity and learning. So I need to be doing something new or reading a new book or meeting new people or going new places. My world needs to be growing. So then the second pillar is going to be connecting with family and friends. So I know I can't get too isolated, but I need to keep up with phone calls and visits and talking and sharing, and feeling close to a larger circle of people. My third pillar is going to be physical activity. That I'm not just my thoughts, but I'm my body too. And so me and my body need to feel alive and be active by biking, walking, hiking, playing badminton, doing yoga. My fourth pillar, which I think we all have in common, is spirituality. So if I'm just spending time in this world and not looking to God and things deeper and beyond, then I feel the lack and I feel out of balance. And now the fifth and last pillar for me is meaningful service. So doing all these other things to take care of myself and keep balance is good, but that energy has to be directed outward, doing something meaningful. And that can be working with special ed kids in my job, or volunteering, or supporting people in need, and just giving back in general. So these 5 pillars kind of became the cornerstone of my personal missing manual. And I still use them today when I feel out of sorts and things don't seem right. When I feel off, I look at these 5 areas, and inevitably one of them is lacking. And with the 5 pillars, I can address the problem and work to make things right. So my question to you all is, how do you work? And what's in your missing manual? And what are the pillars of life that keep your spirit and soul in balance? So now, in addition to that missing manual and the 5 pillars, I think a lot about data and statistics. So not so much in more of a pure numbers way of mathematics, but more of like looking at the world and noticing and making sense of all the information I take in. So I call what I do with that the 80% rule. So now this 80% rule exists in contrast to the 100% rule that many people find themselves stuck with. So I read that pro skateboarder Tony Hawk, who was from San Diego, he used to win gold and get perfect scores in event after event on the skateboarding half pipe. And so he got to the point where he expected to win every time. And so when he won, he was so relieved just to meet expectations. And if he lost, he was devastated. So he didn't leave any room for joy or winning or success. He had set an expectation for 100%. And there's no room to win if you set your expectations up there. You either break even or you lose. So with the 80% rule, I set a baseline where I can win, not just break even. So I set my baseline at 80%. And now it's not that I don't try or desire to do better, but it's just to leave room to win if I can, to break even if I hit 80%, or to maybe make some changes and look at things closer if I drop below that line. So I just want to say that 100% perfection is not the standard, and nor is every failure a time for self-castigation. So if I have a bad day where it feels like I've missed opportunities to make the right choices, that happens. I will allow myself 1 day a week to miss the mark. And that's one bad day out of a whole week. 6 out of 7 days are still, anyone math in their heads? Still 86%, so I still passed the 80% rule. But now, if some situation drops below 80%, then I feel I need to make a change and to look closer. And with that, we often allow others a lot more grace than we allow ourselves. So now my question for you all is, do you follow and expect the 100% rule in your life? Are the only options perfections or failure? Or can there be grace for you and others? What might an 80% rule look like for you, for your family, for your coworkers, or for your kids? So I had these 2 things, and I was kind of cruising on in life, and if you met me 10 years ago, I would have been in that space. Things were humming along smoothly in life, I'm learning more, I'm doing all right. And so these 2 things, 5 pillars and 80% rule, both served me well and were great guidelines. And I knew God and myself, and that was enough. And that all worked one day until a car crashed through my mom's house. And then that brought out the tragedy and the loss of my mom. So we all grow up with a different model and an understanding of God. So if there's 30 people here, that's 30 different models and understandings of God. So my life, which was relatively untouched by loss and hardship, seemed to dovetail perfectly with Proverbs 18:10, which says, "The name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous run to it and are safe." And this scripture spoke to me and fit with my life because after every trial, hardship, or stress, there was relief or peace or resolution at the end. So, or at least a stronger sense of character and belief and trust in God. So I could see God's hand in all things that I experienced. And faith in God equaled deliverance from trial. And now I'm an educated person, right? I know that Jesus was killed and the Holocaust happened. I had been to India and seen soul-crushing, pointless poverty and there and all around the third world. So I didn't live in a bubble unaware of pain in the world or ignorant of suffering over time and in history, but I did live in a bubble that was my own personal experience of life relatively untouched by suffering. So I think experience is the true teacher, and until I had experienced loss, my belief in God was untested. And it's easy to believe in God when life is good. It's harder to believe when life is not. So now, at that time, my theology or my understanding of God was like the lightest of pickup trucks. It worked just fine as long as the load it carried was light. And life had given me light loads. And oftentimes, when hardship comes, that hardship drops a weight on us that is more than our understanding of God can bear. So that little pickup truck of my faith was woefully inadequate to carry the load of the loss of my mom. And at that point, the load placed on me became greater than what my understanding of God could bear. And now at that breaking point, what do you think that most people do? What would you do? Or if you've been at the breaking point, what did you do? I think most people, most often in those situations, abandon God. Just like a busted pickup truck on the side of the road, God failed and is broken down and found lacking. God's false promises and hurtful lies, and why did you ever even believe that God was real? So I had big issues with God breaking down and failing me. My mom was dead, and the God that I had come to know and trust and grow close to, that God was dead too. So I cannot describe what this dual loss of my two closest relationships did to me. My world was shattering. It was not just broken or hurting, but shattering, splintering into 1,000 pieces of sharp pain and disintegrating into nothingness. So now the poet Khalil Gibran says, pain is the shell of your understanding breaking. So a more devout, generous, and God-focused, prayerful person than my mother Carol, I have never known. And if something bad were going to happen, God would surely tell her, right? My mom listened. My mom and God were close. They were very close. So when these string of events from the first accident, when the car drove into the side of her house, to many times in the hospital, to her passing, all happened over 9 months, there were so many opportunities for God to intervene, for God to tell her, for God to warn her, for God to be the strong tower and keep her safe. So now I want this story to be the story where faith equals deliverance for her life. And I want this to be the story where prayer of the righteous brings healing. But this is not that story. So I was left without my mom and without God, who had broken down under the weight of the loss. And I raged against God, this God who failed me and my mom. And I read the Bible and I screamed. I cried and I prayed and I demanded answers. And I lodged my complaint against God and slammed the papers accusing God of failure right there on God's desk. I shall not be moved, I said. I will wait here and I demand to be heard. Here I stand. And I waited and I screamed and I cried and I waited. And my life came to a complete standstill. Everything stopped and I could do nothing but wait for God's response. And as my life and heart had stopped moving, I heard nothing. Nothing from God, and the silence was deafening. And it could have stayed like that forever, or I could have just walked away from God. I don't really know how it ended up as it did. I just had the growing feeling or sense that no answer from God would come without movement, without my movement. So I think God met me in my honesty. I did not know and could not be consoled with platitudes of, she's in a better place, or God has a plan, or everything happens for a reason. God met me because I was honest and yelled and did not give up. My question for you is, are you honest with God? So I began to move and walk with God again. I will participate in this relationship, but you, God, had still better answer me. I am waiting. But that won't prevent me from walking by your side. So I took those first tentative steps with God again. And in any Cold War or stalemate, one side needs to give first for anything to change. So I can't say if I gave first or if God gave me the courage to take steps in spite of the silence. And as I started walking with God again, I came to see that it was my understanding of God that failed me. What needed abandoning was my limiting notion of God and not God, God's self. So I'd made my understanding of God too small and too simple. So I had built my first notion of God, built it with pieces, just like Legos and radios. And that notion had worked up to a point, but failed when I asked it to carry too much. It was like a broken pickup truck which buckled under a load it was not designed for. And now that I saw it was the time to pick up the pieces and begin to build an understanding of God that was strong and mature, and one that could stand up to suffering and loss, to build a God who could carry the weight. And so let me say this clearly, God is not the box that you put God in. So, is your God in a box? So I think it's dangerous not to have any notion of God and who God is. And I believe it's even more dangerous not to move beyond and to let go of old confining notions of God that no longer work. And it's not easy to let go. So how do you survive dire stuff and make it inspirational? I was talking with Daryl. I'm like, this is going to be inspirational? So I don't know if this story is, because other people have survived much harder and worse. But this is my story, and I feel like I've earned my survival. I've earned it not by hard work, although I have worked very hard on overcoming grief and worked hard to form a new concept in relationship with God. But rather, I earned it by simply continuing to exist, by showing up every day, or at least 80% of the days. And now, in this existence now, I don't want to fail and waste my time. Although at times in the past, I felt like I could just slip away and that would be easier and more peaceful. But mostly what I told myself is, I won't let my mother's son go down like that. Now, my mother's son, of course, is me. But framing it like that helped me see my responsibility to her, what she gave to me and what she hoped for me. Now, if my life were just my own, I could have thrown it away out of heartbreak. But it wasn't mine. It was my mother's too, and I had a responsibility to her not to throw away her work that she had done in me. I had seen how hard it is on people that remain in this world to lose a loved one. And I think the dead are with God and do not suffer. The living, on the other hand, we get all the challenges. So I finally thought I found an ally in this journey. That ally was anger. Anger was there for me at 4 a.m. when no one else was. And anger was also there when I got no response to my prayers. So anger always justified me, and anger was always on my side, never judging or questioning. And in time, this anger grew into a rage. And in the wake of my mom's pointless death, I raged against the suffering I felt. I raged against the God that allowed the suffering to take place. I raged against all the people that didn't prevent it from happening, including myself. And my heart turned ugly. I was being consumed inside, and the caustic acid of hate was eating away at my soul. So this could have easily been the end of my story. Man experiences loss, God abandons him, man turns angry at the world and at the God who failed him. We all know people whose anger is their defining characteristic. They are just angry at everything all the time. And that could have been me. But I began to see that anger was not on my side, and that anger's only goal was to play me for a fool and use me to follow anger's own self-destructive agenda. Anger's only goal was to consume and twist my heart. So then I got angry at the anger, and this was a turning point for me. I was deceived, and the anger and the hate and rage were playing me for a chump, using me. So when the anger built up in me, I got angry at it. How dare you twist my heart? How dare you lie to me? How dare you try to poison my soul? And my question is, have you been played by a chump? By anger? Have hate, entitlement, judgment, unforgiveness, and their other deceptive siblings tricked you? Are they poisoning your soul? So the inspiration in this story is that this existence is worth participating in. The other alternative is non-existence, and I think we all get our chance at that. But existing now, alive on this earth, is an exceedingly rare, special, and precious opportunity. Now, the problem of suffering is posed like this. If God is good, all-powerful, and all-loving, then why do people suffer? So now the search for an answer became the focus of my life. It was the biggest question between God and I. And the problem is not over. I have just hit the limits of my knowledge and my ability to know. And no one else has solved the problem of suffering either. Sometimes a problem has an answer, and sometimes a problem just has peace. I don't have an answer, but I found some peace. Now, suffering itself does not have purpose or meaning. It's not constructive or ordained by God. It's just suffering. Pointless. But suffering opens up a door, a fork in the road. Suffering says, this has happened, it is unavoidable, and what now? So this fork in the road and decisions of what to do with suffering are what matter. Suffering is an invitation to go forward into deeper meaning. What we do with it gives it meaning. To survive is to find meaning in the suffering. So I don't have an answer for suffering so much as I have found something larger. So meaning doesn't address suffering, make sense of it, or make suffering go away. It surrounds it. It is larger. Meaning is the more. It's like if you're searching for a missing glove, but then the sun comes out and it warms up. The sun and its light and its warmth are bigger and larger than a missing glove. Now, you haven't found the glove, but it's really not an issue anymore. In the same way, I could have searched for the answer to the problem of suffering forever, but I don't think it has an answer. Meaning is the response that works to address the problem of suffering without giving an answer. So what can we do about suffering? We can try and avoid it. We can try to alleviate our own suffering and the suffering of others, but we are very limited to what we can do about it. Now contrast that with meaning. I do not see limits to meaning. I see no limits to the amount of meaning we can get out of life, the amount of meaning that we can give to others. Meaning is bigger and beyond suffering. It transcends it. Meaning trumps suffering. And the journey that we take to find meaning has the greatest purpose. So now this shifts into a process for me of letting go. And that process started when I saw a Buddhist wall hanging in a bookstore down on University, and these are the words on it that struck me. In the end, these things matter most. How well did you love? How fully did you live? How deeply did you let go? And now I had thought about the first two a lot. Love and loving was so important to me, and living fully was huge. I wanted to suck the marrow out of life. I saw that life as the gift from God, and I wanted to make the most and get the most out of it. You don't give someone a gift for it to sit on a shelf unused. I wanted life, full life, and life more abundantly. But I was dumbstruck by the last question. How deeply did you let go? Well, I hadn't let go at all. I had no practice and no skills in the area. How could I even do that? And so I don't think I entered into letting go willingly. It felt contrary to ideas of building things up, responsibility, fairness, and justice. So I held on to my anger at God and all the moments and all the people that involved where something else could have or should have happened. Now that's a lot to carry. And I was breaking under that load. And I could have hardened my heart so it could carry more hurt and betrayal. But hardening my heart was not the answer. No one wins by carrying the heaviest load with the heaviest heart. So seeing that wall hanging happened at a point where the pain of holding on to hate, unforgiveness, and loss became more painful than the possibility of letting them go. So the idea came, maybe letting go is better. So I wasn't ready and willing yet, but there's a prayer for that, a prayer to be made willing. Lord, help me be willing to forgive. So not help me to forgive, but a step back from that. Lord, help me to be willing to forgive. And with time, that prayer became, help me to forgive. And finally, I forgive, I forgive, I forgive. And I still need to pray this prayer. Forgiveness is not a one and done situation. I let go, I let go, I let go. Forgiving and letting go both need to be done again and again. And so just like getting older means watching what I eat and stretching more and more, getting older means I have to forgive and let go more and more. So we're all just stuck in this sometimes sufferfest of life together. And God is here with us, alongside us in this sufferfest. And all these imperfect people around me, they are all suffering too. So I'll ask you, how well did you love? How fully did you live? and how deeply did you let go? So now let me summarize events up to this point and then share the reasons that I have for hope and for joy. So life led me from love into learning. I took things apart and I built them up. I found a voice and I moved beyond my first identity of being the smart kid. I felt drawn to God and I grew in faith. I discovered the missing manual and the 80% rule. I suffered the dual loss of my mom and the loss of the God of my understanding. I experienced rage, stubbornness, screaming, and tears. I had deep, hard, honest talks with God. I fought against the poison of anger. I moved ahead from suffering without answers. I sought meaning over and over above everything else, and I learned to let go. And so that brings me to this day where my life is a mix of joy, sorrow, and hope, but mostly joy and hope. So my relationship with my fiancée, Rochelle, gives me great joy, along with my cat, improv comedy, leading trips for the Sierra Club, closely supportive friends, reading music, and finding a surprising new depth of connecting with my father that I didn't have before my mom passed. Those were all surprising gifts. And all of these things have come into my life after I lost my mom. So now 10 years ago, if you asked me about my accomplishments, I would have told you they were climbing a 20,000-foot mountain, finishing a marathon, and traveling to 6 continents. So today, I would say my accomplishments are surviving, letting go, forgiving, and loving. So I look to the future with hope, but not hope as delusion or hope without a plan, but hope in God, hope in a better tomorrow, hope that has seen new life and joy rise from the ashes of seemingly unrecoverable loss. Now, this life is a marathon of hope. So hope not just going around the block, or hope for a half hour, or hope for 5 miles, and not hope for a fast K, and not hope when you just feel like it. Every day, there is an opportunity to trust and hope and take the steps to complete life's marathon. So thank you for allowing me to share with you today, and blessings and strength on your lifelong marathon of hope.